Okay, so I'm going to give you my weekly reminder, which is if we have time at the end for questions, please come forward to the microphone. Go ahead and hold it up like you're eating an ice cream cone and speak into it. It's a way that we are inclusive of everyone in the room and everyone online so that we're all part of the larger conversation going on. So please embrace the microphone. Embrace the microphone. Let us pray. O merciful Creator, your hand is open wide to satisfy the needs of every living creature. Make us always thankful for your loving providence, and grant that we, remembering the account that we must one day give, may be faithful stewards of your good gifts. Through Jesus Christ, our Savior, who with you and the Holy Spirit lives and reigns, one God, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
And now I invite Sharon Young, who is on our Fan and Creation Care Council. She's going to introduce our speakers.
Thank you all. I'm going to be brief, which probably means I will leave something out because I want to give these two rock stars as much time as I can. But since Marty and Ann are here, we would like to make them happy. I begin every introduction with, this is FAN, which is the Faith and Advocacy Network. Thank you very much. And Creation Care is involved in this as well. I want to just tell you about a few things, including the handout on your chair. We're stealing a few minutes because this was our St. Francis Day Sunday, which we claim to focus on creation care. We have a great partnership with GIPL, Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. Nancy, who's one of our members, is the chair of the board. Many of us are active. Cody is the executive director. And you just couldn't ask for a better partner in the education and the advocacy and the faith and justice work in the Creation Care Forum than GIPL. They are just fabulous. And they offer so many services we can't keep up sometimes to have time to do them all. But one of the things we thought would be useful as we're sort of coming back live now, because a lot of people are interested in this and we want to get you as involved as we can. This is a survey that GIPL has put together for members to fill out. Now I put it here on hard copy. You're going to get a link as well, so you can fill it out online, but I wanted you to be able to see it, and if anybody wants to fill it out and hand it to Sue Sherrill or Randy Young, afterwards you can also do it on hard copy, and we will tally it and send it to GIPL. It's just, since we're doing so much around here, we'd like to know what you're interested in doing and getting involved with. And you can help me haul styrofoam to Charm the next time if you're interested, and many other things. So that's part one. The second thing, I wanted to take a minute because we don't always have time to really recognize this. But this church, even when you don't hear about it, is doing a lot to try to be as sustainable as we can in this old building. And starting in 2006 with Sue Sherrill's energy behind us, she doesn't like to be recognized, but you can't talk about creation care at St. Luke's without Sue's energy helping us put together the first energy audit, sustainability audit back in 2006, which we partnered with GIPL and South Face, and it was huge. And one of the things I remember of going to the first meeting was, the first thing South Face said was, y'all need to turn out more lights. And it was a reminder that sometimes the low-hanging fruit is the things we really should do while we look at the bigger picture. So in 2012, we did a major summary of the first years of the energy reduction we did. You see the signs around the church, which were supposed to be up for 3 months, and they've been up for 3 years, about some of the things we did. And you will see there that in the first 6 years, we reduced our energy costs as much as 40%. And since then, we haven't kept data in exactly the same way, but it's important to know that two things. Number one, even with what we're doing now, with the enormous rise in energy costs, ours have not gone up. And I've documented that here for the most part, and they go up and down a little each month. They haven't gone up. And we did a mini energy audit through GIPL, energy-wise, a few weeks ago, and they gave us some great suggestions about things that, again, are the low-hanging fruit. Changing out some more light bulbs, improving some insulation that would improve here and save us another $10,000 a year. So we will keep doing these things. Brian on staff is really on this. He's really committed. Michael Glass, Sue Sherrill, David Gillen, the property committee. When you don't hear it or see about it, hear about it or see it, it's always going on here. And hopefully it's a model for all of us in our own homes for what you can do, if it's just turning out the lights. Now on to the main show. I could not be more blessed to introduce these two people to you. I have been blessed all weekend because we lured Maggie Fox back by telling her that 5 college girlfriends were going to be here from Tennessee and Decatur, and so come have a college weekend and speak at St. Luke's again. I believe this is her 3rd time here. Last year it was a Zoom with Ed Bacon. And Maggie, I don't want to take the whole hour to tell you all about her, but she has been an environmentalist advocate and activist, from her work as deputy director of the Sierra Club to the first CEO of Al Gore's Climate Reality Project, to many other things she's done, head of America's Votes. Now she has created her own organization, the Biodiversity Narrative, Global Biodiversity Narrative, and her wisdom is just a gift to all of us. And she's done so much to try to raise awareness and change our culture, if you will, around living in a more sustainable world. Cody is our moderator. Cody Norrid is the executive director of Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. And he was the program director, I believe, before that with GIPL. And he, if you ever go on the GIPL website, he does these great interviews called Coffee and Something Stronger. And Winnie was actually interviewed a few weeks ago. So you can always get a dose of Cody and wisdom from other clergy and other leaders on their Facebook page. Is there anything else I need to say? Their heroism speaks for itself. So I will sit down now, and thank you so much for coming.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Okay, that was just my test to make sure that I'm on. Thanks for having us, Maggie. Very excited.
Good morning, everyone. Is my mic working? Yes. Oh, good. I have one of those sweet, soft Southern girl voices, so I'm happy the microphone's helping. Thank you.
At the risk of also taking up an hour with a single question, I'll ask you to just say a little bit about your journey and kind of what you're holding today as we come into this space.
Cody and I had a conversation last week. It was very short, but it was like complete tie-in. So thank you for being here.
This is my pleasure.
Sharing this conversation with us. And I'm really thrilled to be back here. I have to say, Sharon's a little bit incorrect. I didn't just come because it was 5 dear friends. It's because I love this organization, and I think you are very unique in the world of faith organizations. And your curiosity, your commitment, and both to the work of the church, but also to each other. And I think that's becoming more and more critical in the world today. So I think you're investing not just in your own community, but actually in the world by doing what you do. And these little bright lights are what we have. And so I want to tell you how much I appreciate your light and that I can see it even from Colorado. So thank you. My story is like all of ours. At this point in our lives, we've been doing a few things. And what's fun about getting together with college roommates is what you've already forgotten. And you laugh. So it's like Gretchen is the winner at the forgotten part. But it is a treat to actually explore the past together and remember that the moments that we shared together, we all remember quite differently, which is sort of an interesting notion. I fell in love with conservation while living and working on the Navajo and Hopi reservations. I was a child that spent my entire childhood outside but didn't know how important that was. And now I think if there's any one thing any child needs, it's time outside as much as possible. that formed a big piece of who I am and led me to the work of conservation. What's important about that is I entered it at a time, because we are who we are in time, the Vietnam War, the notion of getting engaged meant you worked in the world of policy and politics. That's where change began, and that's where change happened. And I spent 40 years, or not really quite that long, but almost, working in those fields. And when I started working for the Sierra Club, it was a rich time. Democrats were all over Congress. We passed, my first year in the job, I worked on 3 wilderness bills, a wild and scenic river bill, changing the way Superfund was functioning, and fixing Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. There hasn't been a time in our country like that since. But when you begin and you win, then you think you always can. It's a very sweet way to start, and I'll never forget how lucky I was to begin by thinking things could change, and they did. But as the years went by, I had this sort of feeling of what is it that we're missing, because conservation and the love of the world that we have inherited, why is this hard? It's pretty straightforward. And I learned the hard way that change actually doesn't begin in policy and politics. Change begins in culture. Culture is where we flow through the world. We have our own story, my story, Maggie's story. Then we have our tribal story, the people we love and care about in the world, whether they are close or far. Then we have a story in the Burger community. We have a Colorado story, we have a national story, and then we have a global story. And in those stories we live, and we don't really question them. We don't think about the impact of them until other people's stories are actually clashing. And you're like, wait, how did this happen? How did we get so turned around? And so I've spent the last number of years actually focusing not on climate science, because I spent 35 years working exclusively on climate, but on social science and how human beings actually change or don't change. And many of the lessons of that, we would have been well served to have put a little less time in all the other sciences and a great deal more time in learning what we have learned from the science of human behavior. We change in only a couple of ways. One of them is awe. And the other is magnetic stories. What is a magnetic story? Well, actually, Gretchen was telling one yesterday, and I didn't tell her this. She was talking about a myth and a book. And what happened when I didn't know what she was talking about. It was the sister of Gilgamesh. But that's not what's important. What's important is when she started talking, I stopped doing something that we all do. It's such a built-in piece of who we are in our mind's work. I was clicking of, you're thinking like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, I've never heard that before. That's brand new. Well, that's different. And our listening skills are quite limited, actually. Our brain is busy categorizing and cataloging what people are saying, not necessarily in a judgmental way, but just to make sense of it, put it in some framework. A magnetic story is one in which that stops. And you are physically and minimally mentally leaning forward. You don't know where this is going. You stop categorizing and cataloging, and something goes in and hits a moment, and you just listen. And when that happens, you have heard something that you haven't heard before, in a way that you haven't heard it, and it goes in and a light turns on. And that is how change begins. And I find that beautiful. I also find it fascinating because it's called an abruption, abruption. An abruption is when we stop using our mind and open up our whole being to a different idea. And we need to focus on magnetic stories that give us a chance to have a moment of abruption and listen and just pause. what's happening in the world today that is so distressing is other people are using those moments of abruption as a weapon rather than as an invitation. And not understanding it is dangerous. It really impacts us that we aren't actually aware of how those, the use of moments of abruption in the sense of fear, terror, dismay, frustration, confusion, have the same impact as moments of awe and wonder. And it's important to realize that those moments of awe and wonder always occur in the context of culture, not in the one's policy and politics. And so while those of us like Anne, who've given her heart and soul in the world of politics, it's actually important to remember that politics is only the way we deliver what we've agreed to in the cultures in which we live. And so where our work is really has to be like this community's in culture, so that we can actually do the delivery work when we come to the actions of actually creating policy and doing that through the world of politics. I love policy and politics, but that's not where change begins. And many of the things that we care about in this country, we haven't put the time and effort into feeding the cultural conversations that lead to that shared understanding of the world that we want to live in. And that is where my heart has led me, and my experiences, both in successes and in failures. Like, why is this not working? So I wanted to open with that because I also believe that at the beginning and the ending of all of our challenges is one thing, and that's a broken story about who we are as living beings. Our relationship with all life is one of interdependence and connectedness. And instead, we live in a world where human beings treat themselves and other people and all other life as superior to and separate from. We other everything that we decide not to care for. So we other the natural world and we other each other. We treat the natural world with the same disdain we treat some of our own other human beings. And I've come to learn after a lot of years of being engaged in all this levels of work that we need to fix first the root cause of our broken quality in the world, and that is to realize actually who we are as living beings. And at the beginning and end, every single thing on this planet is completely connected. And the magic and the beauty of it is what should light all of our lives instead of something that we abuse and use without care and awareness. So if there's ever any place in the world to begin that conversation, it would be here. That's my story.
Well, thanks so much, everybody, for coming today. Happy to have you. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
And I think in our conversation, what was so striking is kind of talking about the idea that, in order to care about something, or in order to protect something, you have to fall in love with it.
Yes.
And part of our story is figuring out how do we fall in love with creation and how do we sort of mend that gap. But I wanted to ask you to kind of talk a little bit about, you already have the sort of broken relationship that we have with our environment, but I want to layer on top of that the flaw that we have about seeing human beings as something wholly separate from creation.
Yes.
And how also not only remembering the broken relationship that we have with creation, but in a way it's the broken relationship we have with ourselves.
Yes.
That we have to fix before we can really do this work in creation.
Yes. So what was the question?
The question is, would you
It was
talk?
It was beautiful, but
Would you talk a little bit about how human beings, how we should respond to the discovery of the broken relationship, and how do we find our way back?
That is a good question. I don't think there's one path. I don't think there's one path for anything. I can tell you my path, and I'll give you some examples. First, the magic of the natural world is, I don't have words for what it means to me and how it fills my spirits and my being in a way that I like holding my children when they were born. There's just this feeling of awe and wonder that you can't, if you open your heart to it, it actually fills it completely. The first time I read a book many, many years ago about trees, where I realized that the communication between trees is far more sophisticated than our own. And the shift in understanding from dirt as dirt to dirt as magic, as sexy, as exciting, is, there are so many different avenues. You know, I don't know if you know, but beneath the soil there's a mycelial layer, which is, we didn't even know that word. Do you understand that? How long have we been alive? Just us, just the people in this room, how long have we been alive? And the word mycelial, no one knew it? We haven't even begun to understand life on this planet. The notion that rock is inanimate and not sentient, what is that business? That's such foolishness. We are so limited in our capacity for understanding life. So how do we fix ourselves? Open up to life and find those places where the very idea of life is the miracle of it, the splendor of it, the magic of it, the sophistication of it, the complexity, far superior to ours, far more extraordinary than ours, I find utterly delightful and renewing. Regenerative agriculture is something I work on a great deal. I'm on 2 different boards. I do a lot of other things around it because why? It makes me smile. And Ted Cruz can do something, but he can't mess up dirt. There is a lot happening in the world that putting your hands in soil and getting outside and being around the sheer magic of the world that we live in is really the richest antidote. When we damage and hurt each other, we actually return to the natural world for healing. And we also do that in community and in spiritual activity, but there is a simplicity. And as I've always said, what is it about the natural world that I love? It's the only predictable miracle. There is a miracle every moment that I am open to seeing it. Whether it's in something growing in a pot in my yard or a magnificent display that I have sought by climbing in the big mountains. The other part of my story is that I found my way to Outward Bound when I was just out of college, and then I worked for Outward Bound for many years and met my husband in that way, and he led me together to the world of international mountaineering. And I've had the joy of climbing big peaks all around the world. And what I remember of those journeys is those moments when the magnificence of place washed through me in a way that I can't really communicate with words. The first serious expedition we did was in British Columbia, and it was hard to get to. We went to Vancouver Island, and we had to ride a boat up the inner passage that dumped us out on a beach full of cobbles, and the British Columbia forests of trees, which are nothing like trees in this part of the world. We had to bushwhack for 9 days, and then climb onto a glacier, then get the skis off of our packs, which were very hard to get through those bushes and trees, put them on and ski up a glacier, and we spent 45 days skiing up, climbing the peak, coming back. It was really hard. It was really extraordinary. But the one memory I have of it that is seared into my soul is we climbed a snow peak the entire way. And we had a steep ice climbing pitch to get to the top so that one person could be on the top and had to come down before the next, and there were 6 of us. What I didn't remember from the maps is that there were 2 summits. and one was right behind that we could never see. And when I got to the top of that peak, there was a second summit not very far away that would be unclimbable. It was rock and shale. I mean, you just didn't actually get up to it. It was also lower, which was a gift, because then we were at the top. But the end of day light was shining on it, and I thought I had never seen anything that beautiful. And this was in 1977, 1978. I can remember it precisely. If I could paint those colors. Why? Because the magnificence, the work it took to get there, the edge on which we stood, the closeness to life and death, the notion that I got there. How did I get that lucky? What in the world? I went from being a speck in the middle of a vast glaciated area to soaring. And that's really available to all of us. You don't have to climb Mount Waddington to do that. It's actually right there. And so it's really about a point of just recognizing that and inviting it in. And it shifts how you think about yourself. It shifts how the world flows around you. It's both empowering and an antidote at the same time. And in that sense, it is a recognition of who we are and how we are a piece of this. And it changes the way I do everything and think about everything. And for a long time, I actually believed it was in human interaction that other people also were open to that. And I think that's the mistake I might have made, was to recognize that the cultural conversations about living in the sense of being part of a system of life that is magically still unfolding in front of us is the only way to move forward in the world and to actually build a future that we want together. One of the things that's really complicated about right now is we have so much to be against. We don't want climate to change. We don't want the biodiversity in the world to die. We don't want people to be starving all over the world. We don't want our economies to tank because we haven't been smart about how to invest in the future. We don't want. Well, the future that we do want is where we should put our attention. What world do we want to live in? What does it look like? How does it feel? What is it like to be connected in a real way? Even though that doesn't mean we're not going to be grumpy and imperfect and have not enough sleep and not always know exactly what we're supposed to be doing. I'm not talking about perfection here. I'm just talking about grounding, rooting in truth, and how that can make an enormous difference in seeing and executing on a future that looks very elusive and forbidding at this moment.
Yeah. We spend a lot of our time at GIPL telling people that, we do education and then we do these practical climate solutions like energy efficiency and insulation, but that we can't get at a lot of the root causes of environmental injustice without going towards policy and systemic injustices, which I think is true.
Yes.
However, what's at stake if we sort of hang our hat on just being dedicated to policy as the route for change? You've talked about this sort of, what does it mean to change culture? And I think that's what I'm asking, sort of what's at stake if we don't dare to pick up the question of how do we change culture and instead just beat our heads up against the policy wall to make change? And then also, how do we, as people of faith who have always been involved in informing culture, that's what we do, how do we do that better?
Well, the first thing is we are where we are right now is the reality of focusing solely on policy and politics. We have lost the cultural conversations in this country. They are running hard in a direction completely contrary to what we know to be true about this planet. And we are largely superior about that. They're ugly, they're not kind, they're doing this. They're saying, how in the world can we tolerate these people and what we say? Are we setting up an alternative story? Are we doing what we need to be doing to feed a whole different way of thinking? Do we run in our politics in a way that actually opens the doors? Do we understand that human beings don't change in the way we'd like to think they do? I've been just laughing about this with the 5 of us this weekend. We are very rational in our approach to looking at how the conversation is going, and there is nothing rational about love. And there is nothing rational about any decision that human beings make that we care about. We don't even buy houses rationally. We don't spend money rationally. We don't love rationally. We don't work rationally. Did you take that job because it was rational or because you just wanted it? Have I taken jobs that were rational choices? I'm a lawyer. I've made a dime as a lawyer. I mean, honestly, I haven't done a single rational thing in my life, and I've loved every minute of it. We have a big mistaken idea that rational arguments drive change. They do not. Numbers, we're good at numbers, really good at numbers. Look at this and look at this, and we'll put this up. And people are like, they're gone. And it's not that the rational work. I'm a lawyer, for God's sakes. There's scientists in the room. We need every bit of that. But we must remember that we choose out of passion and love. And then we post-rationalize it with facts. We lead with facts and forget that it really, truly, a cultural conversation is a seduction in the most positive sense. I want to invite you to care about something that I know you do care about. I'd like to have a conversation. Let's open with those conversations. It's a very different thing. And we are at a moment where our side of this debate is actually still focusing and demanding rational responses and rational answers when that is not what opens any conversation or any door. It isn't. I wish it would. I like that. I love facts. I want facts to be a part of a conversation, but that's not going to be able to be a part of it until after we are in the same room, in the same conversation. Then information starts to be of great value. And we can't make good decisions without that, but we are not ever leading an invitation that way. That is not a cultural conversation. And we have forgotten that. And I do it still to this day. I'll start, and then I hear myself and go, whoop. Stop. This is not that it's not critical. It's not that it's not important. It's that we are forgetting how to lead and how to begin and how to make the connection so that the facts are suddenly something people want because they are ready to move in that direction. I want to give you an example. This is a crazy, silly story, but I was traveling all around the world on climate. And I'd been in Africa and 2 other countries, and I landed in Washington, D.C. My husband was serving in office in the United States Senate at that time. And why did I think it was an important thing to go to this thing? Because I couldn't even walk a straight line. I was so jet-lagged. And I walked in, and Obama, who we all loved, and 4 or 5 other members that were running for re-election in 2012 were on the stage, and they were rattling off policy gains that had been made. And I was so tired. I was leaning in a wall against the back. I was so tired. I didn't have any power to categorize or have my brain just start firing off like lights, listening to the facts. And it was a policy conversation. And the room was full of people like yourselves who loved them. Applauding, love you, this is great. Lily Ledbetter passed, women work, wages are going to get better. And I was watching the faces of these people. These are our people. They didn't know what they were talking about. They just knew they loved them. They could have said that we're getting new kind of dog food. And I was like, oh my gosh. Look at this. This is a room of people who vote for these guys, who writing checks in support, who love everything they're doing, and they don't know what they're talking about. because they were talking about statutes and the names of them. And most everybody in the room, even these highly delightful, what I call the tried and true, which is what you are, they didn't know what they were talking about. Even Obama. Think about the health care legislation that he came into this office and knew we needed to do. Did he ever have a conversation with us about it? When it became legislation, 1,200 pages, I read it. There was a contest at that moment in 2009 and 10 when there was a climate bill that was 1,500 pages and a health care bill that was 1,200. They were about the specific solutions to solve these challenges. We had had no conversation about any of those solutions. So what happened? The American people started falling off. And the other side was running aggressive cultural campaigns about the insanity of it. We had no cultural campaigns. We didn't pass a climate bill. We passed a health care bill that no one understood. No one understood. No one knew what was going to be different. We had a couple of sound bites, but the complexity of it was left. We didn't have a conversation about what kind of health care we wanted. So we moved a massive piece of legislation, and we lost the 2010 election and all power in the House and Senate. Did we stop and figure out why that happened? No, we've just kept going. And we're still right there today. If we had a chance to do a climate bill right now, when the president ended up being able to sign the IRA, you know what was really interesting and important about that? Nobody knew what was in it. Because there's been no conversation about it. It's going to be implemented, and I think it's actually going to go quite well. But it was a complete, hello.
Yeah.
So this is a very serious moment. I talked about this briefly with Cody. There are indigenous people all over the world that have named this time. The Hopi call it the Great Turning. And the Hopi are living on the second mesas in Arizona, a stark, beautiful, very difficult place to live, because their prophecy is that they must be there to lead us to the fifth world. They are all waiting. We are there at this moment. And this is the time for us to learn how to make a decision, how to enter the great turning, not to fear for it, but to lean into it. We are in the great turning. All the systems of the world are changing. Not one single system. Gender, economics, governance, climate, the planet are changing. This is the biggest time in human history of change. And instead of going like this, we need to lean in. We need to go, okay, this is where we are. What are we going to do about it? How do we lean into the future with a belief that the natural systems in the world will actually lead us to a place where we can live in harmony with this planet, or move into a new world, whatever that may be?
I know. We have a couple of minutes left, so I want to
We probably
ask
have
one
none.
question, and I'm going to try to push a bunch of stuff together to make it
go,
happen.
go.
But you've kind of talked about the current landscape that we have now, and I know a lot of people in this room are probably bombarded with all of the things that we're getting wrong. How many species we're going to lose, how many miles of coastline
Yes.
we're going to lose, who's going to die,
Yeah.
how are we going to get our energy. And I guess as a person who started their professional climate journey at a very different time,
Yes.
when not a lot has seemed possible for a lot of my career, and
Yes.
doesn't seem possible kind of looking down the barrel, what would you say to people who are continuing to do that work? Kind of how do you keep hope, but really want to ask you, what if we get it right?
Yes.
What if we dare to believe that the harmony is possible? What do we get?
Well, we have to define it. I mean, that is the key. The inner. I'm good at focusing on what we're losing. You and I could have a contest.
Yeah.
Just how much we're losing. We just put things up on a board. Chalk, 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 chalk. Okay, what does that do to my soul? It withers it. It's It's so very painful. And so what I say, I spend a lot of time with international youth, with the starting of this endeavor that I'm involved in and founded. I speak to young people all the time, many of whom are started as early as 9 or 10 and are more sophisticated activists than you and I. And they are feeling that same, like, oh my God, it never occurred to us when I was 12 and I understood what climate was that we weren't going to do anything about it. And they look at me and go, what are we supposed to do? It's a hard moment because there aren't really big signs of hope right now. And what I say to them is that the renewal that comes from, I was actually doing a podcast or an Instagram thing with a bunch of young people from all over the world on a Sunday morning. And I said, well, do you have any dirt to put your hands in? And this one boy goes, yeah. And I said, I know this will sound a bit silly, but when we are faced with the kind of challenges we have, you must root yourself. You have to root. You have to root yourself, and you have to root in your community. That is the only antidote to these horrendous shifts that are occurring in the world. It doesn't mean it's easy, and it doesn't mean that we can't make it happen, but we actually have to find that rootedness and stick with it. And it's not the same for everybody. For some people, it's music, the universal language. It's poetry, it's dance. For me, it's wandering outside until I get that predictable miracle feeling again. The chaos of the world changes for me when I get outside. It smooths out. I accept it. I know that I can't have it my way. I just feel cleansed. I feel clear. I'm ready to get back at it. I'm ready to try a new thing. I'm ready to start conversations differently. I'm ready to bare my heart in front of a group of people I don't even know. What will happen if I do that? Not much, negative, but we don't often do that. So I think one of the things to do with young people is to be honest with them about how challenging it is. To say that I've been working on climate for almost 45 years. I don't even know what that means. Who those numbers are just weird. So I think it's better to not use them, actually. But also to say that one of the ways is to actually find us, who are seasoned warriors, and never not be working with young people. Never not be working with young people. No matter what it is you do, no matter how you do, you must be around young people. Because their sense of the possible, remember our sense of the possible? Mm-hmm. Their sense of the possible, we can't hurt that. We have to actually engage with that. We have to make them stronger. We have to actually give them our wisdom, and if they reject it, fine. What do you need? That, I think, is like getting outside, like digging in the dirt, this pure magic, and it works every time. And so find your way to partnering with young people. And you have to leave out of your circle to do that. Get out of your circle. Move to where they are instead of waiting them to come to us.
Wonderful.
Time out. Cody, I think... Yeah.
That's why you sit there, Neil.
Thank you. I have one question. Shepard and I were talking. I grew up in a conservative, evangelical, fundamentalist organization, a church, that kind of thing. Thanks be to God, I got somehow out of that. I think some of the rest of you may have grown up in that. How do we position ourselves? I have a brother who's in one of those churches, the same one I was in. Mm-hmm. Why is it that, and what do we do to offset this binary, if that's the word? You love God and hate the environment. you love God and you hate anything that has to do with climate change. That's of the devil. That's a curse. That's driving us away from our evangelical roots and our love for God. We've got this terrible chasm.
Yes.
And maybe, Cody, you have a way as a faith guy. This is a terrific name for an organization. How do we position ourselves? It's a lot of what Maggie has said, but how do you see us overcoming this chasm, as you described it, between people who say they love God but just hate to have anything to do that drives them away from this very narrow view of themselves and their faith?
That's a great question. I'll let you. Do you want to answer first? I mean, I'm happy to, but it's your.
I think we should answer together.
Yes, please.
Fear is at the root of that. Fear. Fear is a huge driver of human behavior. And the only way to open a conversation is to honor the fear. Gretchen teaches me that. You have to honor what people feel, even if it's very contrary to what you feel. Because when you're wrapped in fear, there's literally nothing you can do but just, you have to invite people out. You have to first honor it, actually hear it, listen to it. Sometimes that's hard because it's very harsh and it's not the way I want to live in the world, but if you push against it, you get more back. It's the same whether you're with a child or an adult. It's the same. Not honoring that fear is a big mistake. We don't do that. We're disdainful of it. And I have been disdainful of it. It's not easy to honor it, but you must. That's one. And because this is a brother, creation care as a concept, as a beautiful framing, came out of evangelical churches that are trying to find their way out of the box that they've built for themselves. So just the fact that you're in that conversation, you already have a way. Ask the question, what does creation care to mean to you? We're doing it this way. How are you doing it? Because those words are actually extraordinary. And they could be in every conversation. They don't have to occur in a faith-based context. They can be, creation care is an idea universal to humankind, or should be. And so the first, I think, not pushing against what is abhorrent to you. It's hard to do, but you must begin there. Because if you don't do that, that person isn't seen, doesn't feel heard, and is going to just keep pushing against you and every piece that whole system represents to them. And then there is this notion of cultural storytelling is the way to shift a narrative. But first, this is really about transformation. We have come to a moment in human history when transformation is necessary from the individual and from our society. But where does it begin? With me and you. And when you are around people that have gone through a transformation, you can feel it. It's a felt sense. It's not intellectual. It's not the least bit intellectual. It's a felt sense. And so when you're around people who are wrapped up in fear, you have to accept, just let that show, and then invite them to do something else in a simple way. And it's not easy, but that is the journey that we're on. And what is that notion? I think we were talking about this in the last couple of days. Sometimes it feels like that little light that you are in for a moment a part of means nothing in a dark world, but that's actually not true. And if it is, wouldn't you want to be the light? No matter what the outcome is? So on some level, there's a sense of, I will be the light, and if it stays dark, I'll still be the light. And because there are no promises here. I wish there were. There aren't. But I think if you know your rootedness, you honor that rootedness, you reach to people that are in fear, you connect with young people, and you work at it in a sense of possibility and belief, that light will spread. I think it will. I believe it will. And if it won't, I still choose the light.
That's good. I'll be super quick. I think people have a really hard time looking in the face of pain and not having compassion, right? So it's really hard to care about an oil well breach somewhere because it's very far away and untangible. But I come out of evangelical communities too. I say I'm loosely Baptist these days. And I would say there isn't a Baptist church in the state that doesn't care about feeding kids and getting them backpacks and trying to figure that out. So part of it is rooting it locally where they can see that there are people that need clean water and clean air, and what does that do to kids? There are people that care about that. The other is exactly at the level of culture and storytelling that we're talking about, right? People make meaning out of the stories that we tell and how we ascribe it value. And the reality is that for evangelicals who take the scriptures quite literally, it is about a game of storytelling, right?
Yes.
The beginning of the story, the first commandment is to care for the garden. At the end of the story, God promises that there'll be a fountain of clean water flowing from the throne of God and the city that has a forest grown up with it, right? That's a story that they believe is true. And so a question is, well, if the water's poison, then how does that work? And if all of Jesus' parables are rooted in agriculture and in creation, if it's all poisoned, what does Jesus talk about? How do we do baptism well? How do we do broken bread and wine? How do we do the sacraments if there's no water? I think those are questions that kind of like force back on the narratives that people make meaning out of. Because the reality is they already believe the truth. They just need to see it in their stories because the storytellers that they see every week aren't telling the stories appropriately. So part of it is taking the stories and not letting people own those stories, but telling them differently. That's it.
Thank you all so very much. And I hope that whoever is ready to go to church will join us in church at 11:15. If you want to stay around for a little continued conversation, feel free to do that too. Please join me in thanking our guests.